All right. I call this regular meeting of the Midcoast Community Council for October 24, 2018 to order. The council members, please introduce themselves from my left.
Dan Haggerty.
Chris Johnson.
Claire Tutot.
Oh, Brian Klein, sorry.
Dan Wilson.
Lisa Ketchum.
And Barbara Mathewson.
Okay. I do not think we have anybody from any government body who wants to make a comment tonight. Ellie Dahlman was not able to be here tonight, and Harvey from Half Moon Bay City Council also was not able to be here. So I will move on to the next item, which is public comment. Does anybody wish to make a public comment on anything not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment. We'll move on to the consent agenda. We have one item on the consent agenda, approving the minutes from September 26th, 2018. Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the meeting from September 26th.
I second it.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Aye. 6 and 1 abstention? Yes. All right, then we are on to our regular agenda, which is, I'm sorry, Chris, I don't have my computer on, so you're gonna have to actually introduce it, but it's CDRC issues.
Yeah, I don't have my agenda in front of me.
Want me to
Thank you very
read?
much.
Yeah, go for it, Lisa, thank you.
Coastside Design Review Committee, Midcoast Design Review Standards Update Project. Introduction to the CDRC's current efforts to revise and update the Midcoast Design Review Standards that pertain to county design review permits, as well as an overview of the role and function of the CDRC.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so I'm going to be doing this with Kayden Haas, who is also a member of the CDRC. We'll be tag teaming this. Do you want to come up right here? So I just want to emphasize to the choir, and I say the choir because everybody in the audience is on design review or county staff with design review right now. So if you're watching this on TV later, this is an overview. We're not getting into the details of like exactly what are the things that we're going to change and what are we going to change them to. This is more of what is the general idea, who is the CDRC, what does the CDRC do, and how do the changes we want to make relate to the current powers that we have, or current purview that we have, and the expansion, the expansion that we want to get into. All right, so let's get started with. All right, so this slide has a history of the LCP and some land use ordinances, and it's not. I mean, you can look at it at your leisure. Okay, these are the kind of things that we're not going to get into the weeds on. What I want people to see from this slide is the local coastal program, which is the set of laws that govern how development will happen in the coastal zone, was first certified for San Mateo County in 1980. Every county that is on the coast has their own LCP. Half Moon Bay and cities as well. Half Moon Bay, I believe, is working through some changes that they want to make to their LCP. It's not an easy process, and this is the beginning of the CDRC's attempt to update the design review guidelines that are stipulated in the LCP. Let me grab my show and tell items here.
And sort of the thing to take away from this slide is, I think going forward, all of this information will be accessible and has been accessible on the MCC's website. So for anybody who's interested in helping us with these efforts and wants to know more about the history leading up to where we are now, they can go in and read more about all of the details and click on the links and find all the information. It's really helpful with understanding what the process is, why it's been implemented, and what we need to do in order to make these updates to bring us to the current time.
So looking at this slide, again, you see some highlights. 1980 LCP first certified San Mateo County. The other things that you see there are updates, ordinance passages that affected elements that are within the CDRC purview now and affect what we look at. I want to point out 2001 there. certified LCP amendments to control house size, daylight plane, facade articulation, and review of R1 residential development. That's probably like the major piece for what the CDRC currently looks at. Excuse me. In the latest LCP update for San Mateo County, which took about, I'm gonna say, took about 10 to 12 years, maybe even beyond there, and it was, passed, I believe, in 2012. Yeah, there it is, Midcoast LCP up, 13 years, right. So what we're trying to advocate with updating CDRC standards will have to require an LCP update. 13 years it took the last one. We're getting started now.
We're hoping to be more efficient.
We've been working on it for about a year, but we're not gonna, we need to be fully baked before we attempt to actually get the LCP updated. And that's what we're working on right now. This is the kind of beginning of public outreach. Another thing I want to, it's not really called out in this slide, but another thing I want to point out is that the CDRC came about as a public response to what the communities on the coast side felt that they were experiencing. And if I can paraphrase what I've heard from people, uncontrolled growth, huge houses that were maximizing square footage and lot space, houses that seemed out of character with what at that time, even more so then, was probably smaller houses, coastal bungalows and cottages, things like that. And it was starting to feel that building boom that if you've lived in California since that time, you remember in the 70s and 80s, it just seemed like there was building everywhere. So citizens on the coast side felt like they needed to have some way to participate in this. Heretofore, I believe that design review was done by a design review officer in Redwood City. And people on the coast side felt like they wanted more direct representation. And so I believe that the first incarnation of the CDRC was actually what was the name? I want to say the planning subcommittee for the Midcoast Community Council. And so from that, that subcommittee would hold hearings and meetings to try to provide input. That ultimately developed into the CDRC, and a lot of the suggestions and actions that that committee wanted to take or did take informed the purview of the current CDRC. So now that we've had this in place, and I don't even know if I'm going off of the presentation anymore, sorry about that, to the wonderful people that put together this presentation. Now that that has been in place for 13 years and the CDRC has been functioning well during that time, and in my opinion, better every year, we're now seeing that maybe it needs to be updated again, that maybe there's some additional things. If we look at this as an evolutionary process, we've gone a couple of waves, and now it's time for another evolution of the CDRC guidelines, standards and purview. All right, so checked out this slide. We're not going to go into read every single word on that page, but again, I want you to get a sense of how long it takes for anything to happen here, and consider that with what we're trying to do tonight and what the CDRC is currently engaged in, which is trying to update these standards. All right, let's go to the next slide. We'll hold your questions till the end, and then we'll. All right, next slide. Okay. So what is the CDRC supposed to be doing? Okay, we review residential development, new and updates to development. So if you're adding a room or a deck or something to residential development, that can include mixed use, commercial development that has a residential component against a set of standards that's been developed over time. All right, the main point of this, and again, this came out of citizen unrest, I guess, in the 90s, an idea that we have some aesthetic here, and that each coastside, Midcoast community, the 5 Midcoast communities, let me just back up and say that the CDRC looks at the 5 unincorporated Midcoast communities: Princeton, Miramar, Moss Beach, Montera, and El Granado. Okay. Half Moon Bay, no. Pacifica, no. So that is the geographic purview of the CDRC. And it is felt that each of those communities has their own aesthetic. Yes, there's a Midcoast wide aesthetic, but each community felt like it was its own neat little community, and it wanted to retain that. And so it wanted new projects and additions to existing projects to reflect the existing aesthetic, or at least be complementary to it. People didn't want the exact same house, the exact same colors, but something that was in the same palette, as opposed to, you might have a nice, wood beach bungalow, a 2.5-story stucco with Spanish tile, and a gigantic 2-story front entryway house right next door to it. Those look incongruous, and that's, people wanted to retain that coastside flavor. So ensure that projects are complementary with neighboring homes, neighborhood character of each Midcoast community, and their surrounding natural setting. So these standards were developed. It's in this blue book right here. You'll see all CDRC people carrying this around. These are the standards. Standards are intended for use by homeowners, builders, architects, designers, and by neighbors and community groups when they want to make comment on these projects, for consideration of single-family residence homes, additions to existing homes, and mixed-use buildings that have a residential component. Also, this is used by the design review officer or the planner. Dennis Aguirre is here tonight. He is a planner for San Mateo County Planning and Building. I think we will work with 3 or 4 different planners on projects on the coast side. So they look at this, the CDRC looks at this, Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors as they review projects. This, for design review, this is what you review projects against, unless it's something else, and then you review it with this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, the standards are not intended to shut down personal initiative and creativity. The standards are there to help inform, that give us options, that if somebody comes with that house I just described, that we can look at the standards, point out where maybe that design is not complementary to what's there, and offer suggestions based on these standards to help move that project in a direction that is more complementary to the neighborhood in which it's located. The CDRC and these standards are not here to generate revenue for the county. Yes, some applicants do have to come back for a second or third or sometimes more than that hearings, and they do have to pay fees associated with that, and they probably have to pay money to upgrade their plans or to change their plans with their architect or their designer. But that's not the purpose of this. It's not to generate revenue, and it's also not, the CDRC and these standards are not there to stop projects, and that's something that I think is important for people to understand. CDRC members do not go through this booklet trying to figure out how we can stop this project. Projects don't get stopped. That's not the role of the CDRC. Okay, so the win-win out of this is through thoughtful application and balancing of the standards, the applicant, which is sometimes the architect and designer, sometimes it's the owner, can get approval for their project, be in compliance with the standards, and let's see, we've had a couple projects like this. Be in good standing with their neighbors. Right? Retain harmony in the community. Because if you come in and you build a gigantic house that nobody wants, and without the CDRC standards, and it's blocking everybody's view, and it's right up to the setbacks, with no articulation, just looks like a massive box, it's hard to explain that to your neighbors and have a happy relationship there. So I have seen it. It really helps when the neighbors come together and they offer suggestions and the applicant listens and we go through the standards and we come away with something that is much more pleasing to everybody. That's really the ideal vision. If you could say, oh, this is what I'd love to have happen out of this hearing, for me, that's it, that the community members who are living there currently find it acceptable, the applicant is happy with their project, and the standards have been met. All right? Yeah, that's a lot of talking, I'm sorry. Okay, here's our current membership. It's important to understand the makeup of the design review committee, because I tell people that we are appointed, we're not elected. This is direct representation in the sense that there is a community representative representing your community, that lives in your community. Currently, that is the way it is set up, but that may be something that we look to change when we look at communities like Princeton that have very few actual residents living there, or communities like Miramar, who also have a very small number of residents. So, when you come to a hearing, you will see 3 people at the front table. That's 2 architects. Right now, we have 1 architect and 1 landscape architect. From my point of view, I consider them both architects. And the community representative. So if it's El Granada, I'm the community representative for El Granada. I would sit there with Stuart Brunel and Bruce Chan, and we would hear the project. It's very important that there be a full committee, because we have a quorum with 2 out of 3, but that leaves a 1-1 vote as a possibility. And we've had problems with that in the past. Over the last couple of years, Beverly Garrity, who was our past chair, has worked with other members of the CDRC to really staff up. And we had a big problem when Beverly came on a couple of years ago. We're now mostly staffed up, but even saying that, people move out of the community. We just had an email from our Princeton alternate, who has now moved to Half Moon Bay, so she's no longer eligible to be the Princeton representative. So that position is now open as well. So those are your members, and that roster is difficult to keep fully staffed. You can see there's some openings right now. All right.
Okay, so that's a good segue into me. I'll introduce myself again. I'm Kayden Haas. I'm the alternate architect. So whenever Bruce or Stuart are unavailable, in order to maintain that quorum, I step in and I help review projects. Speaking from a community standpoint, I was actually asked to participate as a board member for the CDRC when I presented my own project. So I think I come to this whole picture with a different perspective than some of the other members may have. I'm an architect, so I have the professional perspective of understanding the challenges of the documents that we're trying to update. And then I also have the representative, or the perspective of somebody who's going to be a resident in the community and trying to build in the community and has gone through the process of presenting to the CDRC, paying for all those fees, having community feedback, and having neighbors who had, voices that they wanted heard also. So I think that I have a pretty well-rounded view that I hopefully bring to the table and can contribute in that way. And so that's part of the reason that I wanted to help out with this effort and am the co-chair for the effort of these updates, because I do see the importance, and I think that there's a lot of areas that can be improved to try to help have a more eclectic feel that we already have on the coast side, to encourage that, but in a sensitive way. And some of the current standards aren't really meeting that. It sort of guides designs in a very specific direction, and we've seen a lot of instances where it's not adequate to meet the way that people design homes now, even with green building initiatives. So that's sort of a big picture overview on me. We all work together to come up with a mission statement for what is the big picture, aerial view of what we're trying to accomplish here. So what we're trying to do is to establish new and updated design standards for residential, multifamily, mixed use, commercial, non-residential, commercial recreation, light industrial, agricultural, near residential, planned unit development, and the El Granada Gateway development that complement state regulations, area character, and the surrounding natural setting to have a more harmonious coastside community design aesthetic. So I read that explicitly because a lot of effort was put into making sure that we had the verbiage really to represent what we're trying to do here. And what we really want is, in order to have a cohesive and harmonious design aesthetic for the whole coastside, we really felt that it's important to expand the purview from just residential and residential mixed use to include these other areas, because there's been other projects that have come through, and there's been a lot of, I guess, a lot of unhappy residents and people who have felt that the developments weren't sensitive, they weren't harmonious with the rest of the coastside feel and what everybody wanted. And there hasn't been that same attention being paid from a design perspective. And so if we're looking at all the different types of design that are happening on the coastside, we're much more likely to have a harmonious feel and have, the more eyes on a project, I think the better the project will be. So, you know, that's really the goal, is to expand the purview and to work with the state regulations to make sure that the documents that we're using support those efforts. So currently, the Blue Book that's used for the residential design review would not address all of these other areas. And so this is part of that effort to make sure that the document that we all work together as a board and a committee and the community really is going to work for all aspects of design to give us that end result. So that's kind of the mission statement. This is sort of that, I guess the dynamic of the effort was that we've got the co-chairs, Beverly Garrity and myself. So we're sort of trying to make sure that there's not too many cooks in the kitchen, and that it doesn't slow down the process too much and make it something that ends up being a 13-year effort. Hopefully by having, you know, all these different levels of input, we can sort of drill it down, make sure that it's representing everybody, all the voices are being heard, including the community. And then we've got Bruce Chan is helping us as the documentarian, because as we're all busy discussing ideas and throwing them around, we need to make sure that everything is being captured and you know, summarized in a way that's going to make sense. Lisa Ketchum has been super helpful with giving us the perspective of the MCC advisor. She's given us a lot of history as to why things are the way they are now, and what is the structure of the documents from the LCP down, because it is sort of a tiered system, and that helps us all understand how do we need to approach this, and are we making changes to this design document, are we making zoning changes, what's the best way to accomplish what we need to in order for these documents to serve our community better. And so at this point, the reason that we're presenting this is that we really want to present the whole effort that we're making and invite the community to participate and come and give us your feedback, because we know that the residents and people who live in the neighborhoods want to feel heard, people who've been trying to build in the neighborhoods want to feel heard, the architects and the builders, they've all had different experiences with these documents and with the developments that aren't being reviewed by the Coastside Design Review Committee. So we want everybody's input to be able to collaborate early, so that we're not coming to you with something that's already completed and then you're giving us feedback and we say, too bad, we're already done. So we're trying to start this effort early and invite everybody to participate and come help us make sure that we represent everybody's views.
Yeah, I want to just emphasize that as well. Again, the CDRC developed out of a public sentiment, and the CDRC as it's currently constituted is not a monolithic body. There are several goals that we're going to talk about, several categories of information that we might want to work on, or even a couple of specifics here and there. But the CDRC is by no means unanimous on all of these things. So the CDRC has to deliberate and figure out what's important to them. But really, public, I'm talking to you right now, you need to weigh in on this. And what is important to you? What is that community aesthetic that is important? Has it changed since the mid-90s? You know, with the price of houses and property, is square footage, you know, the dominant issue? Should it be, you know, the biggest houses possible for the most investment? The public, the community needs to weigh in to reflect the history of this body and to inform the future direction of it.
So we've started by brainstorming to figure out what exactly are we trying to accomplish. So we've got goals spinning around up there. And so we've tried to organize our thoughts before coming to the community so that we can give you a big picture idea of what we're trying to do, so that when you come help us at the workshops, you know exactly what are the items that we're trying to work on, which of these goals interests you, because we actually even broke that down within our own committee. So what we've done is we've sort of, big picture, created a couple bullet points that represent what we're trying to accomplish with this effort. So we want to combine and update the residential and commercial design review standards, which is these two separate documents, the Blue Book, and then there's the Community Design Manual. Part of the reason for that is that there is redundancy already between the two documents because they've been used in two separate efforts. And if the idea is to be using them across the board, we may end up with one document in the end. We may end up just trying to resolve the redundancies. That's not all completely figured out at this point, but what we do know is that we want the following bullet points to be addressed. We want the building styles to be addressed. The current Blue Book sort of guides everything in a pseudo craftsman style, and it doesn't really lend itself naturally to other types of design. And we live in a community that's very eclectic, and that's one of the things that I love about it. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to move to the coast side. I really like all the different styles and the different scales of architecture, and I think that encouraging those different styles, all of us are individuals, we all have different tastes in architecture, so finding a way that we can create a document that's not going to be guiding designs in one specific direction, that will hopefully be addressed by the building styles. And so for me, that was one of the bullet points that specifically interested me most. The building height measurement. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, so to speak, and I think that the way that we approach that moving forward is something that we want to think about to make sure that we don't end up with these big box, massive designs that aren't sensitive to their neighbors. They're not sensitive to the daylight falling on their neighbors. You know, we've got new green building initiatives and new legislature that recently was enacted for solar. And so, you know, how the building height is measured is something that very specifically relates to daylight planes and protecting daylight on neighboring properties. So these are some of the things that we want to discuss with the community, discuss internally, and find the best way for them to be worded. Same thing with the landscape standards and the site design standards. We have wetlands on the coast side, we've got dunes, we've got cliffs, there's a lot of different types of topography that need to be taken into account and make sure that we're designing with sensitivity. The landscape standards currently have, you know, specific regulations for tree replacement. A lot of those things are items that we want to revisit, make sure that it still makes sense the way that it's being addressed, and hear everybody's input on that from their experience. We, you know, hear a lot of neighbors that have concerns about water running onto their properties and drainage. So all of these items are items that we want to give attention to. After hearing them over and over again from the community, that's the feedback that we've been getting that we want to address moving forward. And then lastly, updating the operational procedures. So a lot of the operational procedures would be including things like story poles, and let's see, what are some of the other items that we've discussed for operational?
There's a future slide.
There's a future slide that goes into more detail on that, but so big picture, these are the goals that we've tried to categorize. And so if any of you out there that are hopefully watching on TV are interested in helping with any of these, you know, we invite you to come join us in the workshops, and we can go into a little bit more examples to give you an idea of what each of them means.
Okay. Expand the purview of the CDRC. Now that may sound a little scary, like we're just grabbing for power, mad power hungry CDRC. No, it's just, again, currently we look at residential, straight residential with a mixed use. But anybody who drives around knows that there's lots of other types of buildings around here. And without a CDRC review of those, what are we gonna end up with? We've got an RV park that's possibly going up across the street, that's gonna have buildings. We've got a fire station going up, that's gonna have buildings. Any kind of commercial building that's gonna go up. There's a small hotel planned on Main Street in Montero. These things are currently not within the CDRC purview, and we are feeling like with the way that the committee has been functioning the last several years, with the fully staffing up, that the committee is ready and able to look at those things, and we're looking to expand the purview so that we can apply consistent standards and process across Midcoast development. And not to make everything look the same, in fact, exactly the opposite. To have it have its own character, but also be harmonious and complementary to what's there right now. Without a single body looking at all of this development, how could that ever happen? So that's something that we're looking to do, and several projects over the last few years have had us thinking about that. I mean, if we look at the big wave development, now that was reviewed by CDRC, but that's one of the reasons why we're looking at these updates. That building, because it was mixed use, was reviewed under this document, which is from 1976, so before the first LCP certification. It's very thin, there's very little to go on in there. Whereas straight residential uses this document, which is 28 pages of standards and discussion. So we want to have a standardization of the process and the standards for all of the development. So areas that we are currently not reviewing would include things like light industrial, commercial recreation, non-residential commercial. Those are things that we are exploring expanding the CDRC purview into. And this map right here shows a variety of the different zoning districts. Right now, CDRC looks at R1 as 17 primarily. And you can see that, of course, that's where you would expect it to be, the neighborhoods. But again, there's lots of other buildings here. And I would point out an example, without trying to be too harsh, the Oceano Hotel and the accompanying mall that's next to it. Legend has it, I've been told by numerous old-timers from the coast, that why does it look like that? Well, it didn't come under CDRC purview. It was not reviewed by CDRC. But why does it look like it does? I was told that in the 60s and 70s, Westinghouse Corporation owned a large part of the coast side, and they had a plan to develop the entire coast side in kind of a planned unit development style. And the architectural style that they had in those plans from the 60s and 70s is what the Oceano and the mall is based on. That they just dredged up those plans and built what was there. So that's an example of, the Oceano seems extremely tall when you're standing on Capistrano looking up at it. And, the mall probably would look different if it was under CDRC purview. I don't know what it would look like, but those are the kinds of things that's the project that I look to and think that I wish that had come under the same process and the same standards that other projects across the highway have come under. Other projects, again, I mentioned the fire station. I don't particularly have any objection to the current plans for the fire station, but it seems logical and consistent that it would come under the same body that looks at the house right across the street from it. That went through 3 rounds of CDRC review for certain standards that it ultimately was deemed to have met, but which we don't know whether the fire station's being held to the same standards. And so if I'm that homeowner, I would like to know that the standards that I had to meet are also being met by the large building across the street from me. So that's one of the reasons that we're looking to expand, or those are the reasons we're looking to expand our purview. This is me, Dave, and Dan at the 1978 Half Moon Bay High Prom. We all forgot our shirts, but worked out okay. So that picture's in there because that's contemporary with this document right here, which is used for mixed use.
And that image actually isn't even the coast side, it's Foster City, so,
Yes.
we really want something that speaks to the coast side and, is created on the coast side, for the coast side, by the coast side.
Foster City, but if you've driven up through Lindemar, you probably would say that there's a complex of apartments on the east side of Highway 1 in Lindemar that looks very similar to that. And this could be what the coast side might have ended up looking like, if not for the intervention of citizens and the formation of the CDRC. So again, we have two different documents that we have to look at depending on the type of project we are reviewing. An antiquated document that's kind of a vestigial document that's left over, and the more robust document from the last LCP update. Again, logically, and for better process and result, we'd like to see that made into a single comprehensive document. One, to make it easier on CDRC, and two, so that there's some consistency from project to project. It's hard to have consistency when you compare the standards in these two documents. If I'm an applicant, I feel like if I have to go through the blue document and another project only has to go through this, that's a lot more work for me to have to go through the blue document as an applicant. So we're not trying to make more work for people, but it needs to be fair, it needs to be comprehensive, and
It needs to be as thoughtful as we want the design on the coast side to be. So we're really taking the time to do this effort. I don't think that it's something that we all got out of bed in the morning and said, you know what, I'd really like to go embark on this possible 13-year journey. But we all feel it's that important, and that this is a community that we really want to develop with thought and care, and continue to foster that sense of community. So that's sort of the effort.
so, as Katie mentioned, so landscape standards are something that need to be updated in this document. There's been several different laws passed recently by San Mateo County and State of California regarding landscape regulations, what needs to be in there, different mandates. We need to update this guide to reflect that. Landscaping is a big part of design review. It's a big part of the coast side, and these documents need to be updated to reflect updates that have been made to landscaping standards beyond the Midcoast. Site design standards, I think Katie already mentioned some of what those are, the contouring of the site, retaining walls, drainage, things like that. Those are touched on in this document, but we're now getting to a situation where a lot of the lots we're looking at are the lots going up the hill. They're very steep. Their drainage is an important part of it. We feel that the standards need to reflect these considerations more than they currently do. Other things, I'm just going to list them, and we're not going to go into detail here because we're not trying to solve these problems right now. But other updates, other issues that we've looked at that maybe we are going to discuss in going forward in the future. Katie's mentioned building height calculations, landscape standards, zoning. Now, zoning is not, a zoning change is not, zoning is not in here. It's not in this document. That's going to require a separate effort away from the CDRC standards, but it affects what we do in CDRC. Building height calculations, same thing. Okay, there's nothing in here about how specifically high the building can be. It's about more subjective. What is the apparent mass and scale? Okay, but when we have a building height formula that leaves a lot of wriggle room, it does affect us in how we're dealing with mass and scale and apparent size.
Yeah, and
So-
another way that comes into the picture is that the roof forms kind of can affect the height of a building too. So how we end up prescribing these roof forms or the height limits, you could end up with a flat roof design that goes up to the maximum height, and then it ends up being a big, massive, overpowering project. Whereas there's other ways that you can describe the height limits, and it could be a max plate height and a max ridge height that would leave us a lot more room for design of the roofing. And so roof designs are one of the areas that hasn't been addressed adequately for a variety of design styles in the Blue Book right now. And so that's one of the areas that it's kind of straddling the line between the design review standards and the zoning. And a lot of the feedback that we hear from the community in these design review meetings is that they're items that relate to the zoning, which is not something that we have purview over. But we're trying to make sure that as we make this big effort, that if the zoning is where it needs to be corrected, in order for it to achieve what we need it to for the community, then we're trying to look at that as well.
Yeah, just to thank you very much. And to clarify, we are not advocating that zoning be within the purview of the CDRC. We're not trying to expand to say we want to have decision over zoning, no, but as Katie said, zoning does influence our
It influences
our
massing.
review, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's part of this package that we're looking at. A couple other things, roof materials, a lot of people are having solar. Solar is not seriously addressed in here, so that's an example. A member of our committee has mentioned form-based code, which I'm not that familiar with, but in reading his description of it, it looks like design based on what the structure is going to be used for rather than where it's located. Does that sound right to you, Katie?
I mean, I think my interpretation of it, the best way I can describe it is that in some municipalities, they have what's called a buildable envelope. And so if you were to take the setbacks and the maximum height and the daylight planes that are described in the zoning, that creates a volume of space that you are allowed to build within. And that's the form that it has to fit into that buildable envelope, rather than saying that there's a specific architectural style of articulation that needs to be accomplished. So I think that my interpretation or understanding would be that a form-based code would be something that's a little bit more broad and generic, that allows designers and homeowners to really have more creativity with what they're trying to accomplish, rather than something that's prescribed and already guiding it in a specific direction, or one architectural style, like Craftsman seems to be sort of the guiding force of the Blue Book. So I think that that's the idea behind the form-based design, would be that it's more generic and more like a buildable envelope, rather than specific, style of articulation. A modern design might not have a lot of specific articulation, but maybe, with architectural details, but it might be accomplished with different materials, so there's a lot of different ways to accomplish a nice balanced project. And I think that a form-based design might be a way that we can accomplish that. So we wanted to explore that as the possible approach for how we rewrite these standards.
And even though I admitted that I didn't fully understand form-based code, I wanted to mention it because this is what I'm saying to the public. You need to weigh in. Does form-based code, as Katie described it, sound like something that you want to see on the coast side, or the predominant style here? And if you look at a lot of the illustrations as well, and it's even called out specifically a few times, coastal craftsman. It doesn't say that's the only thing, but that is called out as like, what if you were to just in a broad painted swath 15 years ago say, what's the predominant style of housing on here? I guess that was it. Have times changed? People want to see more in different styles. Do other people want to retain that kind of coastal craftsman heritage? Now's the time. Now's the time to give that input while we are chewing on these things and sussing them out. And so that's one of the reasons that we're here tonight, is to let people know that now's the time. If you have ideas and thoughts, the wheels are starting to turn right now. Okay. All right, this slide looks at, just kind of breaks down the documentation, the standards. I actually turned right to the page that it's on. So there's several different subsections to the design review standards. For example, a major subsection is elements of design that includes things like building mass, shape, and scale, neighborhood scale, second stories, daylight plane. But there's other subsections that have different categories in them. Additional site planning, landscaping, paved areas, fencing, lighting, and noise. So there's major subsections, and then there's smaller sections and smaller sections. Eventually you get to a discussion, let's say landscaping. I don't know if anybody can see this right here. It's similar to the page that's right there. There'll be a general discussion of landscaping. Okay, and that side kind of sets the context for you. And then there will be some specific standards. It is only the standards by which a project is reviewed. Again, the discussion kind of informs the discussion, gives some context, kind of sets the plate, and then the standards are what we give back to the applicant in terms of, let's look at your project versus these standards. So when we are talking about updating the standards, it is the standards that we are talking about updating. There might be some modification of the discussion, depending on what happens with the standards. But again, the standards are what projects are judged on, and that is what we are looking to update.
Yeah,
is
there's
the
sort of the
standards part.
specifics of the big picture of each item that is a design consideration. You get sort of an explanation of what that is, because this is supposed to be a document that can be understood by anybody. So you need to have that explanation of what is the topic, and then the standards are what the project will be held to.
Okay, so, in addition to the documentation, the comprehensive documentation, trying to get these two documents into one, updating the standards, which would include landscape, site design, there's some operational procedures specific to the CDRC that we may need to update. And again, those are spelled out in the LCP and by ordinance, so we have to go through the formal process on that. Representation. We had the slide before that showed how the CDRC is organized. One issue that has come up, and I mentioned it earlier, is that Princeton has, what, 5 houses there? So the pool of people, residents who live in Princeton who could be eligible to be a Princeton community representative, very small, very difficult to get a Princeton community representative. And I believe that we made a decision last year, the year before, that we would allow someone not from Princeton to stand in if needed. Now, we may need to expand that to other coastside communities. We've been looking for a Miramar representative for at least a year, and we just can't quite get someone in there, let alone the representative and the alternate. So representation may need to be, the requirements for representation may need to be updated.
Yeah, in order to have that quorum that Chris spoke about earlier, it's really important for us to have those 3 people that are there to review a project. And you can have both of the architects there, but you still need to have that community representative.
Professional assistance. Unlike the MCC, we do have the benefit of county staff to help us to answer questions in a hearing. But I know for myself that I'm probably the least knowledgeable person about architecture and building and design on the committee, because I'm not in the business. I'm not a designer, I'm not in real estate, I don't have anything to do with those things. I'm just a member of the community that loves the community and wants to help out. So it's taken me a while to come up to speed, and probably still the weak link on the committee, but fortunately there's 2 architects on the committee that really know what they're doing, 3 and counting our alternate, who really know what they're doing. Professional assistants, both for members of the committee, possibly for applicants who may need professional assistance.
Well, and I think we were actually touching on that because there's some times where you have a project that gets presented, and literally anybody can design and apply for a permit for a single-family residence. So you don't have to be an architect, you don't have to be a designer. So it's entirely possible to have somebody bring a project in front of the CDRC that has a lot of problems and really is going to need more than just the comments and feedback from the committee. And so in order to sort of protect that person or that applicant from having to come back and do multiple visits over and over again, additional cost to them, it's taking up county resources and the resources of the CDRC. There may be times where it would be a recommendation that they need to get professional assistance from a designer or architect, because they're not really able to bring something in front of the community that's going to be accepted. They're not understanding the document. There could be a lot of different reasons, but that's one of the procedural updates that may be needed, because it almost comes down to them trying to get the architects on the committee to fix the project for them, and that's not really the purpose of the committee. You know, we're not here to try to enforce our design ideals upon the community, and we're not here to give free professional advice either. So there's times when a project may really need more help than the applicant is able to do on their own. And this is one of the areas that we were thinking might really improve the process and protect all the resources of everybody that's involved, including the financial resources of the applicant.
Some other things that we're looking at would be compensation. Right now, there's a $50 stipend per meeting for members of the CDRC, which is $50 more than we're making tonight, right? So it's something, but I mean, it's in the these meetings are in the middle of the day. Sometimes they're all day. It's a big hit to people, especially if you're working on the other side of the hill, or you're working at a job where, you know, taking the whole day off is, you know, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, $50, you know, whatever. So we've looked at different ways that, well, what would be equitable? Should it go to zero? You know, should it just $50? Like, why even bother with that? Let's just go straight to pure volunteer work. That's something community, you know, it's ultimately your money. So, you know, how do you feel about that? If there's, you know, if there's more money paid, would it raise the caliber of applicant, or would it now turn it into something where, you know, there's cutthroat competition because there's money involved? Probably we would never get to that much money, but those are considerations. Again, community, you need to come and weigh in on those types of things. Story polls are another area where we've worked with county to try to refine what the requirements are for when story polls go up and how long they can stay up and when they need to come down after a meeting, and then explaining that to the community. So process and oversight clarification there.
Yeah,
Again,
and also, when do they need to be modified? So for instance,
The story polls.
if a project height needs to be changed, or if the roof line is being changed, you know, is that something that we're going to require them to go back and change the story poles so that the community can see how that's been adjusted? How does that affect the neighboring views? How does that affect the mass and scale of the project? So we feel that there is more elaboration that's needed for the story poles. If there has been a change to the story poles, how much longer do they stay up? You know, there's a lot of expense to people to put up the story poles, and they're also unsightly for the community. So we want to make sure that we're hearing from everybody on how we want to see this revised, if at all, so that it, you know, reflects the changes that are happening in these meetings.
Those are some of the examples I give. Beverly, how long when did we first start talking about this? Maybe a year ago, a year and a half? Beverly Garrity, former chair of the CDRC.
Talking about modifying
When we
our
first,
design review?
I can remember, I don't remember the exact time, but we kind of like looked at each other in a meeting and said, you know, maybe we should start thinking about updating these guides. I want to say at least a year.
So what we discovered was, as I would say in the last 3 years, as we were trying to improve our operational procedures, we realized our hands were tied on many fronts by the documents that we had. So as much as we could get clarification on what our areas of responsibility were and what our areas of authority were, the standards documents themselves weren't really supporting us. So we started to inquire, particularly with Lisa, you know, how that might take place, how long that timeline would be, and you'll be getting to that, and what we might be impacting.
Thank you, Beverly. So, yeah, maybe as long as 3 years ago, and then I think it was last summer, we started starting our meetings a little earlier. Lately, the last few months, we've even been having separate workshop meetings, separate from the standard monthly meeting, to start to get this list going, to start to kind of bring together the various disparate things that had come up over time and pull those together into some kind of bucket that we could then say, okay, this is all the things that need to be addressed or that we think we need to be addressed. Let's start working on the process for how that would actually change. We're in the middle of this process now, or I'd say we're at the beginning of this process now. We're a year into gathering that. We're now kind of starting the public outreach of public, we're doing this, we'd like your input, and there's gonna be more meetings on this going forward, special meetings by the CDRC to work this out. But we need community input, and that's one of the reasons we're making this presentation here tonight.
So speaking to that, this is sort of the timeline that we have established or anticipated and discussed. And so we started working on the scope and the goals back in June of this year. And we have refined those ideas and tried to create those big picture bullet points to organize our thoughts to bring us to this point so that we could present that progress that we've made on trying to organize these thoughts. And so that's what we're doing here today, to invite the community, present to the community what it is that we're trying to accomplish. We're planning on having some workshops that we'd like to invite the community to, and those dates, I believe, are going to be posted on the MCC website once they're established. Is that correct, Lisa?
Oh, sure.
So we'll make sure that people can regularly check the MCC website and see when can they get involved and come join us and work on these items. And then we're also going to be working in subcommittee to try to refine them further, even looking to other communities that have design review standards, you know, throughout the state or even in other states for inspiration on, are they doing something better than we are? We don't necessarily feel the need to be reinventing the wheel here. We want to be finding ways to improve what we're doing. So we're going to continue working on that in 2019, and then we'll be completing a draft of the update that we would like to be reviewed. The CDRC would be meeting with the county planning and council to confirm the process that we need to go through, and we're anticipating that that would be in 2020. And then the California Coastal Commission certification is when that would be actually, I don't know if the approved is the correct word, but that's when all of this effort would be approved after we've gone through all those steps with county planning. And then implementation would be 2022. And we've also discussed having workshops after that point where we could be sort of informing the community, architects, builders, how to use the new documents and answering questions about them, making sure that everybody understands how they would be applying to projects moving forward. So that's our abridged version of the previous 13-year process. We're hoping to be more efficient, more organized, and that's why we're doing this early outreach to make sure that there isn't a lot of back and forth. We know it's not going to always be a completely linear process, but if we can try to, approach it with everything out there and have all of the ideas organized and just get down to the detail, and then run it through the county and all the correct steps that they outline for us, then hopefully we'll have this all wrapped up in just a few years.
I just want to harp again on community. Please get involved, because if we look, the last update took 13 years. A term on the CDRC is 3 years. I believe you time out after 3 of those terms, and you can maybe do another half if you took over in the middle of another term. So maybe you can serve 10 years on the CDRC. It took 13 years. So we have to have community involvement to carry this process forward. On our best hope here, 2022, that's 4 years from now, the CDRC may have completely different members on there, and they will be trying to carry this project forward. It's going to require the community to backstop this entire effort. People that are living here, that are going to be living here in 5 years and 10 years, come to these meetings and give your input, so that if the committee does have turnover and there's new faces here, they're still carrying forward with the same momentum and the same ideas that originally started with. And it's not every time that there's a new member or a new turnover in the CDRC, the whole thing gets disrupted and off track, and it takes a while to start up again. Otherwise, it will be 13 years till we get to the next one.
So speaking to the public input, we are going to be announcing the dates for the special planning sessions. Let's see, the second Thursday of each month. Does that Is that when we're gonna be having the workshops?
No, that's the regular.
That's the regular CDRC meeting.
Second Thursday of each month is our regular CDRC meeting, and we're considering tacking on to our regular CDRC meeting a public session for the public to participate in the standards updates.
Yeah, so the first date that we're discussing possibly doing that is November 8th. And so I think we're gonna shoot for that being our first workshop, and then we'll continue to establish the dates. Hopefully we'll have more people there than just the committee, but we would love to meet everybody who has input to offer and, you know, brainstorm and figure out how we want to move this document and effort forward. These updates and resources will all be available on the MCC website.
November 8th will be the first meeting. There's only one project on the agenda for that day, and I believe that we are planning for an extended meeting. All CDRC meetings are public meetings, open to the public. However, unlike MCC, they are not televised, so you have to be there.
No cheating, you have to show up.
Yeah, right. No Cliffs Notes for the CDRC meeting. Okay. You can go to the San Mateo County website, and look at the CDRC pages there, which include archives of past projects. I don't think the plans are on there, but you can see the agendas for that. You can see agendas for the upcoming meeting, and I believe the week before the meeting, the plans are also posted. So you can take a look at some plans. I brought plans with me, well, but it's all CDRC here right now. If anyone wanted to see like what a packet looks like that a CDRC member gets, I've got that with me. But the very best place to go for any information on anything happening on the coast side is the Midcoast Community Council website, thanks to Lisa Ketchum. That's midcoastcommunitycouncil.org.
These are some of the positions that we're hoping to fill, so a community that's out there that's listening and interested, you know, please do let us know if you're interested in applying. We definitely want more representation for these communities. We've got vacancies. We've been reaching out through various different social media sites and Nextdoor, but, you know, put the word out there, even if you don't want to do it, but you have a neighbor that you think might be interested, you know, please do let them know and put them in touch. And we would be more than happy to have you.
And this is a picture of the new house that's going in at Princeton. It's not, no.
I thought it was the one next door to you.
Yeah, right. I could live
Was that an articulation suggestion?
there. Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's a variety of sizes of windows, you know. The fenestration.
Exactly, right.
How many square foot is that?
Sort of in closing, you know, these are some of the supporting resources. This presentation, I believe, is going to be available on the MCC's website, so
Yes.
everybody can go in there in their own time when they have availability and see the different resources, check out all of the different links that we have available. You can delve into the history that brought us to where we are now. And we really hope to have a lot more community support and input as we move forward on this process and meet more of the neighbors. So please do come out November 8th. The design review meeting is starting at 4. And then I think as soon as that's done, we'll be starting the workshop, and then that'll be a hard stop at 7 p.m. And that will be here. 5 to 7 is the workshop.
On November 8th?
Yes.
All
I think that's it.
right. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Chris, how do you want to handle questions and comments? Do you want to do the council first? Do you want to do the audience?
Well,
For questions?
I guess let's go with the audience, because that'll be fun. Hopefully be quick, since they are all participants in this venture. Any questions from the audience? Any comments that you'd like to make?
If you do, please go up to the podium so it's got on video.
My name is Beverly Garrity, and I co-chair the effort to update our standards, and I represent Montera on the CDRC. What I'd like to emphasize about this effort is that our whole intention is to make this process for applicants as efficient as possible, while still meeting the goals of design review. And in order to do that, it's very important for us to get feedback from the community. You don't have to be an official part of this process. You can come to the meetings and just let us know what your concerns are. And one of the first and foremost concerns of most applicants is, how much will this cost me in terms of time and money? And that's really their bottom line, because they want to get through the approval process of San Mateo County as quickly as possible so that they can realize their dream or the actualization of their project. So we're not looking to add time and complexity to the project. We're looking to fulfill the original goal of forming the CDRC, which is to say that we have local representation for local projects. And it requires perspective from the general public, whether you're an applicant or you're a neighbor or you're a professional. It's of great value in making this process real.
Thanks, Beverly. Anybody else in the audience want to speak? Since we have a very small group, if you want to later, just let me know. We'll be somewhat informal tonight. Anybody on the council? Brandon?
So a couple questions. So the first one is, when you're looking to expand your purview to other categories such as commercial and et cetera, wouldn't that be under different standards than what you have right here? Because commercial buildings functions much differently than residential. Because if you're going to have a restaurant, you need a commercial kitchen, you need a certain standards, county ones, and all these other fire sprinklers and all these other things that are going to probably look much different than where you're going to live.
It's a good point, Brandon, and the answer to that is yes, that is part of it. If we are going to, if part of our expanded purview is going to say, let's say, straight commercial, non-residential, well, fire sprinklers, that's something for the fire, that's not in purview, but yeah, we are going to have more standards, different standards for that apply to those specific types of structures. For example, signage. Okay, signage is not something that we have to deal with in straight residential. Nobody has a sign, illuminated sign on the side of their house that says, Frank and Mary live here, stop in anytime. So that's not something that we look at. It is briefly addressed in this document for mixed use structures. But yeah, so that's an example of yes. If we expand purview, depending on what type of building that we're looking to expand into, the design standards will have to reflect those types of structures in those types of zones.
But they wouldn't address things like kitchens and the like, because those are internal, and CDRC does not look at electrical, plumbing, bathrooms, et cetera today,
right, yeah.
except as much as they affect the outside of the house.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave. Design review is really about what you see from the outside. Now, the layout of the house inside can inform what the outside looks like with wall articulation and roof design and whatnot, but where the bathroom and privacy, where the high activity rooms are located in their windows, and whether that's adjacent to another person's bedroom. So in that sense, the inside of the house does affect our decision making and our review, but we don't go inside the house and start looking at how many bathrooms does it have and what do these stairs look like, and I don't like the way your closet door opens. But your point is well taken. Yes, there will have to, if we expand into different zones and different types of construction and design, we will have to have standards that reflect those areas. And that is something that we will have to suss out in our meetings. Where do we want to expand our purview? What is required in those areas?
And some purviews such as agricultural areas, you might want to add an agricultural expert as well.
Well, I think another good point, Brandon. I think one of our points in one of the slides was professional assistance. Yeah, I mean, having experts to inform us, especially if we're looking at going into areas that we've never reviewed before. So I don't want to, again, the CDRC is not here to throw up hurdles, to ruin anybody's project, and I certainly try to err on the side of caution, especially when I don't know what I'm talking about, which I know is all the time.
Somebody else on the council? Claire?
I'm trying to conceptualize zoning versus design review versus building codes, which I guess would pretty much cover most of what you looked at. Zoning probably gives you broad parameters of what could go in a certain area. Setbacks and stuff would be part of that.
Yes.
No? Yes?
No.
Okay. The design review is what, within the purview of the zoning, what does it look like? How does it function within the
Yeah,
context?
it's really, I mean, it's hard to explain sometimes because they're standards, but they're stipulated, but they're subjective in terms of, there's only 2 or 3 spots in here where there's a specific number, X amount of this or Y amount of that. It's more of apparent, does this, what does it seem like? Does the garage seem compatible with the rest of the structure? Well, that's in the eye of the reviewer, right? I mean, compatible with the rest of the structure. Every applicant that has brought their project in has felt yes, otherwise they wouldn't have done it that way, right? So the subjective standards try to apply consistently are different than ordinances and zoning.
And the building codes would be more like, where are the closets, or where are the staircases, how tall is the ceiling?
Right, are the treads on the stairs a certain depth, something like that?
The building codes are more the safety and structural engineering implementation of the zoning ordinance.
So are there any other ways of looking at this besides zoning, design, and code?
In terms, what do you mean by ways of looking at it?
If you're looking at something that somebody wants to build, or at the overall community, how it's put together?
CDRC, I mean, that's a good question. I can't think of one offhand, but are there other considerations that play into our decisions?
And then the corollary question would be, how much interplay is there among those 3 things?
Yeah, we've had this discussion in CDRC where I've made the statement that zoning and other ordinances have nothing to do with what we look at because we only look at these things, and that's been argued by other people saying, okay, but that's depending on the zone it's in, then that will determine what other buildings are there, and that might determine whether this is complementary with those buildings. An argument could be made that, yes. Oh, Kate.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I didn't want
Please,
to interrupt
just
you.
jump in.
Yeah, I would
otherwise.
say that one area where there is some overlap, at least, between the different aspects that you're speaking about, we're reviewing something aesthetically, but the building code does come into play with that in some ways, because, for instance, we have different high fire hazard severity zones in the highlands of El Granada, and so the materials that are being used have to meet a certain standard that relates to building code and to WUI. But there's a certain quality of the material, and it's not just the aesthetics at that point. So I don't know if that's kind of speaking a little bit to that overlap, or that something that we're reviewing isn't going to have to only look nice. It's going to have to actually meet some other standards as well.
I think the height calculation is a big one for us, because that's not in the CDRC purview, but apparent massing, scale, and size is, and so that ordinance, that measurement affects almost every project we look at, especially if it's on a slope.
So is building height traditionally under zoning?
So
Yes.
can I try and add some clarity to this? You introduced a third element into the mix. So we, in our study session on land use planning and project approvals, there's a page there with all the review of the project that the county staff does, and then there's the public process on the other side. And basically, as you know, we see a lot of this here because we get the early referrals, and you can track what basically, first, the county is looking at the development standards in the zoning ordinance for that district. How high it can be, what the setbacks are. So that's the zoning ordinance for the district. Design review is also in the zoning regulations, but that's aesthetic, and that's a separate step. Buildings code is another thing entirely, and that's not discretionary. Basically, once the project gets approved, design review is approved, the building permit, it doesn't have a public component to it. The project just has to comply with the building codes is all. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So we struggle with this ourselves. Another example of where it can overlap is drainage, which used to be in the building department in San Mateo County, and now there's an early review process or assessment process, evaluation process in the planning department. So is that a zoning issue or is that a building code issue? So there are many times for specific projects where we have to ask that question too. Is this a zoning issue? Is this a design aesthetic issue? Will this be handled under the building codes? So there's, it's not absolutely clear cut, and these are some of the questions we're asking in our review process and updating these standards. Where do we need to draw the lines? Where do we need to get involved a little bit earlier, or hopefully a little later, or not at all?
So there is a lot of potential coordination or limit setting.
There's a tremendous amount of coordination, and our efforts in the last 3 years, I would say, would be to try to define our boundaries of responsibility and authority relative to these other bodies. Yeah.
And Beverly alluded to one of them, which was fire safety, but in the agency approvals, the fire department will sometimes weigh in and say, no, you can't build the house there because we can't get an engine to it. So you have to recite the house in a different part of the property or get an easement to have a driveway somewhere else. That's happened many times. Fish and Wildlife may weigh in and say, no, you really are too close to a sensitive area. So those are none of the building, zoning things. Those are all the various agencies. Caltrans can weigh in and say, no, you can't have a driveway on a public highway. Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to everybody,
Can you take your mic back now?
thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think it's a great effort. You know, it's all about best implementation of planning, right? For our coast side, for our lovely, cherished coast side. I think the commercial element is very important, probably long overdue. Just quickly, I do believe Craftsman's good. I am interested though. I mean, how do you define Craftsman? I know there was a Mediterranean style home that was up in Moss Beach. So I don't know, quality. Can we just say quality Craftsman? Anyway, I am going to have some questions in the workshop about the concept of the form base, because I would say, is my opinion, that the larger the structure, the more important it is that it's well done. I'll just say that, well done. Looks nice. Yeah, that's it. And hey, more money for members. It's time. It's your own time. It's got to at least pay for breakfast.
All right, Dan, we gotta get Dan to our meeting next time. And we are having this meeting, again, the workshop is 5 to 7, and one of the reasons it is 5 to 7 is because normally our meetings will start at 1:30 in the afternoon. We're really trying to make accommodations to get public input, so we have backed this meeting out to have the project be reviewed at like 4:30 or 4 o'clock, so that people who are coming from over the hill, who are working all day, if they so desire, they could come to this meeting without having to take the day off of work. Other questions?
Sure.
Chris, is the CDRC going to have any possible input on the Cypress Point project?
Oh, yes, that is a residential,
Right.
straight residential, so yes.
Cool, okay.
I have not seen, heard any word on that.
Yeah.
It's possible, they may have a pre-application meeting on that because it's such a big project, but I have not heard anything on that. They don't have to.
There's not gonna be any more public process on that this calendar year. Design review and all that stuff would happen in the second phase of permitting. The first phase here is just the LCP update
Yes.
on the density, and once a CDP application is submitted, then we get into the details. So next year or later than that.
Has the LCP been updated yet?
About what?
For the,
No. No, there hasn't even been a public hearing yet. And there won't be a public hearing on it until after this year. I have a bunch of stuff if you
Go
want to
for
go.
it.
So I just wanted to emphasize, first of all, I just want to thank CDRC for everything you do. Basically, Dave and I and the MCC in the last however many years have been like the P&Z committee, and we get all these referrals from the county. Thank you very much, Dennis. And basically, if it's a house on an infill lot in a neighborhood and it's not next to the creek and there's not, environmental concerns, we say, great, CDRC can handle it, and we don't even have to get involved. And that's, of course, the vast majority. So I just wanted to address a couple of things, just to emphasize the local coastal program has two parts, as we went over in our study session. The land use plan has the vision more, and then the implementing ordinance, our zoning ordinances, are the LCP implementing ordinances, and those are supposed to implement the, so basically, what I would, and design review falls under the visual resource component of the LCP. So, and I put this on the design review page on our website. You can link to just the visual, I know the LCP is a big document, but this will just take you to the visual resources component. And I would urge all the CDRC members to read that first, and you don't even need to read the whole thing. I'm going to just call specifically policy 8.13 is the special design guidelines for coastal communities. A is for Montero, Moss Beach, Elgornot, and Miramar, and B is for Princeton. To read the policies there and think about what you want to do with the design review ordinance. Do you want to make it implement those policies better, or do you want to change those policies? Because those are two very different things. When you ask for community input, basically, if you want to change, for example, it says in there, non-reflective pitched roofs, and some partial roof could be flat, or, there's some leeway there, but the main theme here is pitched and non-reflective. And so if you were going to say, well, we'd like to get rid of that hampers us, that's a discussion that needs to lead at the top of the thing. Here we're proposing to change this. Does the community agree with that? And so the first step, I think, for the committee to do is to become really, it's just a short section, really familiar with what the policies are. And if your changes in the implementing ordinance will make those, implement those policies better, that's great. And this will help you get it approved at the Coastal Commission easier. And also that page that I linked the documents to, you can see when the design standards were first crafted. It only took a couple of years, a year or two. But then there was this long period of time where, for various reasons, it didn't go anywhere. And when it finally did get to the Coastal Commission, they looked at it very carefully, and they said, well, you need to modify this, this, and this, and they gave their reasons, and it's in there, if you read the staff
I
report.
know you sent this to us before. Could you send it?
It's on the design review page on the MCC website. All those links are there. It's in the history column. And so all the documents are there that I have talked to you about before, and I can add whatever is useful to you and build that page out. But, and another thing to keep in mind on the Princeton, this 8.13, just to keep in mind that Plan Princeton, the preferred plan, calls for redesignating some of the blocks in Princeton between industrial or commercial. And so when if you're driving through Princeton and thinking, well, that building looks terrible, we need to change that, just to keep in mind that it may no longer be industrial, it may be redesignated commercial. And so you can also look on the Plan Princeton page and see what blocks are gonna be changed from industrial to commercial and vice versa. And that will help you as you look at the buildings and as you're thinking of ideas. What else have I got here? Also, in that visual resources component of the LCP, 8.12, design review standards to apply outside the 1 and 2 family residential districts are section 65, 65, 17. That's in your, it's in the designs review district, the DR, just the whole thing that the Blue Book is a part of. I mean, you talk about your Blue Book, that's a part of the design review ordinance. And so there, when the design reviews, I don't know whether it was this part where the design review standards were being certified or the finalization of the LCP update in 2012, but basically, I think it was the one in 2010 when the Coastal Commission approved the standards. And the submittal had left out any reference to the, that slim book there, the 76 thing that people disparage. But, okay, so it's old, but it's all there is to guide the design standards for those kinds of buildings. And if you look, so the section 65, 65, 17, standards for design in other areas. Basically, if you read through that, you'll see the similarity between that booklet and that. And the intent was that that was going to serve that section in the design standards, and that we didn't need that anymore. And it was the Coastal Commission that says, no, 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 you need to still reference that book because there are things in there that aren't anywhere else, which you found out because in the rural areas, the LCP and the different districts say you can't have any advertising banners that are shiny and moving or flapping or any of that. But it doesn't say that in the LCP for the urban area. The Midcoast urban area doesn't say that. Like neighborhood commercial, it doesn't say that. And we tried to get the county to take down these offending banners or whatever they were, and the county said, oh, but that's not prohibited. It's not in the zoning, it's not in the LCP. But it is in that book. And the fact that it's still referenced in the LCP, we said, yeah, but here it says you can't have all this stuff. So they said they would enforce it. So we need to make sure that everything in that slim book is captured that's important in what you finally end up with, because that's important, and it's nowhere else for the urban mid-coast.
What's the name of the book called? Community Design Manual.
So, you know, I understand it's awkward having the two books and all, and that could definitely be fleshed out, but yeah, just don't
Don't lose
forget
any important
anything.
content.
Yeah. Also, just wanted to point out in the map that showed on the history, that map that was on the left, that's the boundaries of the Midcoast LCP update. And that's the area that CDRC has purview over. Anything that's residential in that entire area, no matter what the zoning district is, you currently have jurisdiction over. And we're not talking about the rural area out there, just the urban Midcoast. You mentioned the Oceano and the out of scale, whatever, concerns. Basically, of course, there wasn't design review at the time, but that's not a design review issue. The zoning at the time, the development standards in the zoning district were for 36-foot high and that crazy way of measuring it, so that they could put as much fill as they wanted to and then make the building 36 feet above that. And that's what you're looking at when you look at the front of the hotel. And it was after that was approved that they lowered the height limit in Princeton and changed the method of measurement. But it was too late for that project. But basically, this illustrates the connection between the development standards in each zoning district, if they're in there, and the design review section of the zoning regulations.
Bless you.
So I know I've heard this at CDRC meetings, oh, zoning, that's not our purview, it's not purview. But, you know, everything you do is built on top of what development standards are in that zoning district. And you saw this with Palomar Bluff, like, oh my goodness, this is resource management. There's no, it's a different way of measuring. You can't have second units. All these things were different. And you did your best to make those buildings look smaller, but you couldn't make them shorter because the zoning allowed it. And so this is why it's just so closely connected. And as you know, and thank you for your support, the MCC is trying to get that method of measurement changed, so it's like the other districts in the Midcoast. Basically, the resource management, that's ship has sailed, because those 4 houses are probably all that we're going to see. But the neighborhood commercial, all those pockets of neighborhood commercial, C1, from El Granada up to Montera, that are right next to the residential neighborhoods, they all have that crazy, very liberal height method of measurement. And if you look, and this is what I recommend you do too, as you look at expanding your purview, and particularly the neighborhood commercial, look at the C1 ordinance itself, look at the S3 overlay, and see what development standards are not there. I mean, it just, and can you actually craft design regulations without any underpinnings? Like which is more important? And this leads into my urging you to be protective of staff time, because we are told the reason these zoning ordinances can't be updated is because there's not enough staff time available to do it. And so the more, I appreciate your effort on this and all this, but as much as the committee members can do their own homework and study up and protect staff time, that will help the big picture. Let's see what else I got. On the goals page, landscape standards, I've been on the county tree regs committee, and that's wrapping up. They're going to have a study session at the planning commission the end of this, I think, maybe next month, maybe December, soon. And basically, this is a comprehensive update of both tree ordinances, the significant tree and the heritage tree. It's combined into one. This particular is only for the urban area, which is, your purview. And basically, so I have a link here, and I can send this to you, the county page, and you can see the latest version that they'll probably present. And because it looks to me like your whole section on trees won't be needed anymore, because you would just refer to the county tree regulations, because it's, like I say, comprehensive. But you should be aware of that, and plus you might want to comment, and like I say, it's wrapping up. And the other thing is, of course, the state water efficiency landscape whole thing that the county also already is reviewing on projects that you don't need to worry about, so I don't know how that affects what plans you might have for your, because I know you have a section on drought in there, and perhaps that won't be needed, I don't know. You had in this presentation, create standards under the DRX process, and I'm just, Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it the same standards, only it's reviewed by staff instead of the committee? So it wouldn't be a matter of making new standards, the same standards that you use.
What that is about is,
You go to the mic so they can pick it up.
what that's about,
To clarify, is, for example, the ADUs that have a CDX, a DRX, sorry, we don't review the ADUs,
Right.
but they're part of the whole design in a new build, let's say, if it's just not the addition of an ADU. So we're just trying to figure out operationally how we're going to address that. Do we need to consider looking at the ADU when we look at the new structure, the main house? So that's what it referred to for us, those exceptions and why they're exceptions, and if they're part of what we're reviewing, what do we do? What do we need to do?
My understanding, Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong, is that ADUs can't be reviewed at a public hearing.
that's correct, that's CDRS.
Dennis Aguirre, co-site design review officer. That's correct. Going back to your question about CDX and DRX, I think I would really recommend the committee, the CDRC, to look into the scope of where DRXs can be allowed, because right now it's, staff has a hard time, I have a hard time trying to determine where the fine line is, knowing the scope that the CDRC wants to get involved with. I think it's an important scope that you might want to determine as to whether or not, okay, if, if this square footage, a certain amount of square footage needs to be looked at by CDRC, then, we're not going to be able to approve or actually take in a DRX. So that's something. An example is the threshold for a DRX is 150 square feet, but I have the prerogative of allowing a little bit more, up to maybe 250 square feet, because there is really no impact on the facade. So we go ahead and just, approve that DRX, because for that to go in front of the CDRC, it's just not a good use of their time. But there may be some instances where they want to see a 250 square foot addition in front of them. It could be. So that's something that could be considered and part of your discussion too.
Could that be something like the referrals that MCC gets? Could it just send them the plans and ask them if they want to review it, or, I don't know, just a thought.
The only way that we can do that is if it's a formal CDRC application and not a DRX application.
Okay.
Also, I'm sorry, I'd like to point out your mention about the policy, the LCB policies. That is actually a really good point, because staff uses the policies when we bring the project to the planning commission. So you really have to start from the policies standpoint, because that is really the umbrella. So you have the general plan, and then you have zoning. So that's a really good point, Lisa. Thanks for bringing that up. Because the visual resources policy, I think it's not enough. And I think you may have to really update that, and that's going to be, that's going to have to go to the Coastal Commission, because it's really thin. It needs a lot more weight. Because what you're suggesting here, what you're considering, that's actually going to affect the language and the content of the visual resources policy moving forward, especially with the community design manual. So please.
So what you're saying is the project's going to take longer than, all this means longer, right?
No, not really, no, because that's going to be part and parcel of what you want to update, because if you're updating the standards already, and that's going to go to the Coastal Commission. So, I think part of that, the main bulk of that and the foundation of that is going to be the update on the policies.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I apologize if you're not quite done yet, Lisa, but with the LUP, they tend to get scrutinized a lot more closely by staff, and they almost always do go to the actual coastal commission. When they're implementing policies, especially if everybody looks at them and goes, yeah, they're relatively minor, they're in line with everything we're trying to do, they may just go to staff, and if it's big enough set, then it may go to the staff may recommend that the commission just find it's minimal, and then it doesn't actually get discussed at a commission meeting. So you really need to decide the scope, because any change here is almost certainly going to be an LCP amendment. Fortunately, an LCP amendment is often much smaller effort than a whole major revision of the LCP, which is why those other ones were 13 years. That was a major revision of the LCP with these other changes in it. But a smaller, if you watch the Coastal Commission agendas and read the items, there are small changes to the LCP all the time, and they're often don't get any discussion in commission meetings.
An example of that is, a good example is the discussion on the roofs. And because I think the frustration with the CDRC is the lack of language and the lack of support from the design standards relative to contemporary design. I think that it's time to include that into the standards. And that is going to have to be included in the visual resources policy, because you're going to have to say, okay, contemporary design is, it's important, and it has to be part of the LCP. And you have that blanket umbrella language, and you can fine tune that when you get into the standards.
Oh, Dennis, I have a question. Do you have a suggestion on how to get the method of building height measurement changed as fast? How is the quickest way to do that? I'm talking about this, just be for this neighborhood commercial on the Midcoast, basically, the C1, S3. I mean, can't that be done alone in an expedited manner? It's just adding one sentence. We did this with the new mobile home ordinance. They amended it to add that sentence about how the height is measured.
The fastest way to do that is to apply pressure cooker pressure to Board of Supervisors. It's the community, pressure from the community, and that's the only way. Because we get directive from the Board of Supervisors, and if they say this is important enough, they're going to direct Steve, our director, to bring in staff for that. But outside of that, then it's going to have to be packaged with the standard, the update that you're trying to bring to the Coastal Commission for this.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that this is a beefy, lengthy project, and with the current development scene, our neighborhood commercial districts are just ripe with opportunities to build, and by the time this update gets finished, those parcels may all be built.
That's a really good point, and staff feels that too, because for me personally, the S3 is really not, it just doesn't give the CDRC the resource to really come up with what they come up with when they use the Blue Book. The C1, S3 is just, you rely on the community design manual, which is so thin. In the S3 zone, you're right.
It gives you nothing. All it did add, it threw in this.
It doesn't even.
It threw in the 28 feet.
It doesn't even have. Yeah.
But it didn't add the definition of how that's measured.
Yeah, it doesn't even have a maximum allowed FAR number.
Okay, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Setbacks, no setbacks.
It's just the lot coverage.
Nothing,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. So.
All right, thanks. We will work through LA to see what we can accomplish there. Are there any other comments or questions from the council? Anything else from the audience? Okay, I'm going to close this item. Thank you all very much for all the time and effort on this that you've already put in and what I hope to see over the next few years,
Thank you,
including
Chris
the
and Katie.
people watching the video. So we will move on to the next item, which is council activities and reports. Anybody have anything that they want to, Brandon?
So yesterday, last night, I attended a roundtable forum hosted by Jackie Spears regarding airplane noise, from more specifically from San Francisco, and also one of the directors of the San Francisco International Airport was there, one of her advisors, Kathleen, she's a retired pilot. She explained how the airport was structured based on the prevailing winds that blows through the bay, and based on how those winds help the plane takes off, and that's how the airport is structured. And they discussed ideas of sound insulation programs, which would be up to a few miles from the airport. They discussed how they have a program that incentivizes airlines to fly more quietly. Talked about backblast burns, because taking off does cause quite a lot of commotions in the nearby areas. And we spoke about next generation engines, Generation 4 and Generation 5, on how those engines would improve the noise levels, and I was people from throughout San Mateo County, from Hillsborough all the way to Redwood City, they're concerned about airplane noise. So the flight paths aren't just over the coast side, it's over the county, and people are concerned about it. And there were a bunch of other elected officials, such as Sue DeGray. I know she's watching us here, but she's a councilman from Pacifica. But this just emphasized how important this goes to, and basically Jackie Spear is working working with the FAA on how they could change some flight paths to mitigate some of these commotions.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
I'll do it. I went to the housing, let's talk about housing in Half Moon Bay last night. It was basically the repeat of the July meeting. It wasn't too much different. It was put on the same way. But the staff, Half Moon Bay staff, announced that they're working on a tenant, they're calling it tenant protection ordinance, rent control, to present to the city council this winter. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And do you want to talk about the Caltrans thing?
Before you do, yeah,
If you want me to do
I'll add to the housing meeting since you're on it. I was there also. One of the things they were focusing on was more creative ways to get smaller units and more units for equivalent prices, and a lot of discussion about affordable housing. So this is very similar structure, but a little more focused than the first one, if it felt like to me.
Barbara and I went to our Adopt a Highway training last Friday. It was very good. We got the rules of the road, and hopefully she's got we got the equipment.
All right.
So, I mean, Barbara and I had a good time. It sounds fun to me. I like doing yard work, so I would imagine within the next 3 weeks, Barbara, that we'll probably have a work day. So several interesting things that I hadn't considered. We have to meet off site. We can't just show up on the side of the road and be like, okay, you got that. So we have to meet off site. We have to have a plan of how we're going to deploy people to the site. They're very strict about how close we can get to the road and what we can pick up, and they don't want us to pick up a lot of stuff, so I know that's gonna be hard for me to leave stuff behind, but, you know, safety is really important to them. You know, we've got this permit now, so, they just wanna make sure that we're following the rules and there's no accidents. You know, a good thing that came out of it is we have direct contact at Caltrans right now for stuff on the side of the road and trimming and whatnot. And this is part of the idea that Barbara and I had, is that we would really facilitate a tighter relationship with Caltrans so that we're really actually to a point where we can just pick up the phone and actually talk to a person. And we may not get the desired results, but rather than having to go through a website or send an email and hope they get back to you 2 weeks later, like in my opinion, we've already, you know, made forward progress and we have a direct contact. And this person was very enthusiastic about our participation, and so I just think it's a good thing all around.
We got a sign put up, sir?
I think.
We have to work with Ray, no, the other Jim.
Yeah,
We have-
James, yeah.
James, we
Yeah.
have to work with him to get the sign. But it's also interesting that he told us there are only 5 workers that take care of the Highway 1 from the Santa Cruz border to the San Francisco border. Only 5 workers. And so they're pretty busy, and they really appreciate what we're doing. But that was kind of a wake-up call to think, well, they're just sitting around and, you know, in their ready room hanging out. And they're not. They're working hard. So I think it was a really good bridge to,
Yeah, I really, yeah, we're gonna do a good thing, clean up litter, but I just really felt good about it. I think we went in there and he, you know, the guy was like, oh, you know, here's 2 people, they claim they wanna help out, and he was a little skeptical at the
I've heard
beginning.
about that Midcoast Council.
Everybody comes in, they wanna pick up trash, and then they never do it. But I think by the end of the meeting, like, we had convinced him, like, we're not just, you know, just a fly-by-night organization, like, this is part of a campaign to connect to government organizations and community, and we feel that to be that we are that linkage, so just came out of there feeling really good, and I personally can't wait to do it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Great, good to hear.
So what happened after December?
So, of course, I won't be on the council anymore, but I still am gonna participate on this. Barbara will become the main contact, but, anybody who wants to can participate. They just need to, if they're gonna be a lead, so we'll probably need to designate a second MCC lead. And that person will have to go and take the training that Barbara and I did. It took less than an hour, it was very informal. But then anybody in the public who wants to join can do that as long as they come to the off-site, you know, powwow a half an hour before the cleanup event and hear the rules of the road and agree to that. So I plan on doing it. I'm out there sometimes just picking up trash anyways, so this will be great to be part of the MCC. I can't wait to see. I think we're gonna do a work day first and then like start getting the sign put up, but even though I won't be on the council anymore, I look forward to seeing that sign for
The
the
sign is
Midcoast Community
important.
Council.
Yeah.
I really am gonna be proud of that for the MCC.
I'm just curious, you said they don't want you to pick up everything, what are you supposed to leave behind?
Animals, urine in bottles, poop,
Sharps,
sharps,
any,
condoms, body parts. You know,
and nothing with your
things.
hand. You gotta use your grippers. You can't pick up anything.
Anything big, like,
Yeah.
Call the police
microwave.
when you see body parts.
Yeah,
Refrigerators.
That happens in these cleanups.
right, it's like, you think, but I
Yeah.
think we're gonna end up finding some stuff that's pretty,
Yeah, you will.
And we
No.
don't have to do it all 2 miles in one shot.
Oh,
We
no.
can divide it up. There's a lot of places within our area that we cannot pick up, along the guardrails, in front of Carlos, between where you and I, the Valamar, and that strip in there is we have to be at least 6 feet away from the road. So, I think it'll be fun. I'm
Yeah.
excited about it.
Just curious, gloves, wouldn't
gloves,
suffice?
we've
You
got
have to use
gloves,
the-
we've got goggles, we've got,
No, specifically about
I
the,
think that there's a
the
lot.
handle
Yeah,
pickers.
we got-
Yeah, there's a lot.
I
a lot
just
of
didn't bring it,
concern.
'cause I
But if you had gloves, is my question, you still can't use the gloves? to
Yeah, they
pick it?
I mean, you're not restricted to only using the picker, but they have, please use the picker.
Encourage you to use.
So that you don't get poked by something. Also, the world is run by liability, so if you're bending down to pick something up, like next thing you know, they're gonna get a call, yeah, I gotta have back surgery or something, so they want, the guy was all about safety, use the picker.
that no broken glass, nothing that
I'm
can
picking
cut
up-
anybody or hurt
I
anybody.
mean, that's what I mean, it's gonna be hard for me not to
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
half broken bottle, I'm just picking it up and throwing it away. I mean, that's why we're here, right? So, you didn't hear that, Cal.
They're not listening.
Okay, thanks. Claire?
On October 2nd, at the Half Moon Bay City Council meeting, Mayor Penrose and myself presented our commendation, our joint commendation and our joint plaque that goes in the staff room to the library staff who were there, especially released from their duties to attend the meeting. They had a nice reception afterwards. I think a number of people came up to me and said, A, it's really good the MCC is participating in things with us, and B, I never knew what the MCC was. So I think it's a good step, just like the sign on the highway, that we're getting more visible and more coordinated with what else is going on around here. So it was fun.
Thank you very much for taking that whole project from start to finish. Anybody else?
Yeah, so on October 6th, I participated on a workshop panel for boards, commissions, and committees training at the library. The event was put on by the Women's Community Leadership Network, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that educates women on public policy and community issues and equips women with skills to seek appointed and elected positions. This is, I get the idea that this is Supervisor Carol Bloom's committee. She moderated it, and Sue DeGree was there, Mayor Pacifica, and Ruby Salazar was there, and she was invited because she was on the County Youth Commission, and before that, she was on something at Cabrillo School District Youth Representation, and she lives in Pillar Ridge, so we had two people from Pillar Ridge on the panel. That was nice. And then on October 9th, I went to the Harbor District Special Meeting site visit at the parcel that they're investigating for an admin offices and a community meeting room. It's the one that's next to Sam's Chowder House. And if you go along the coastal trail, so like you're below Sam's Chowder House on the coastal trail, there's a bench right there. And if you look up at the hillside, that's the parcel, and you'll see some orange stakes or whatnot there. And basically just sit on the bench and look at the view of the harbor, 180-degree view. And the idea would be, if they go forward with this, I don't know where they are in their process, but that the offices would be on the first floor, and the second floor would be below that, down this slope. So the meeting room, the community room there, which would, I assume, be all windows, would be like, say, 10 feet above where you're standing, and that would be the view, and you're right there at the coastal trail. And it's just a wonderful location. Anyway, that's all I've got.
I have one more thing. I went to the the Beach House Homeowners Association meeting, I think it was a week ago, and they're scheduled to do the trees the Monday before Thanksgiving. They're shutting down the hotel. They have some major work to do in the hotel, and then they're gonna do the trees that same.
Trim the side or top them?
Top them and trim them down. Or I guess that's the same thing, but make them thinner.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And the trees on the strand, those were all removed. So look, it's all open again. Looks really nice.
Yeah, the Harbor District removed those pines from the stream.
Oh, great. That's all good news. Okay, if nobody else has anything, I have one other thing to report. At Supervisor Horsley's invitation, I was appointed to the Tenitas Creek Citizens Advisory Committee. It's a joint effort between County Parks and Post. And we had our first meeting on Monday, which was mostly organizational and what we would be doing. There's a page on the county website that describes the charter. Fundamentally, we're trying to represent as many people in the community as we can for opinions about, what should happen there and what should not happen there. And that will provide input into the policies, and the whole process will take multiple years, as you might expect. After that, we had a site visit down at Tenitas Creek, using the brand-new access road that the Parks Crew built. It provides emergency vehicle access. It's authorized vehicle only, not supposed to be used by anybody else. And the fire department was there, and they had some of their rescue vehicles. Park has a new vehicle as well. Supervisor Horsley was there, and Walter Moore, who's the chairman post, CEO post, I can't remember which. They were thanking us and saying that, they had made a commitment that the public would be able to get into the beach within 3 years. So the first phase is to try and get the public into the beach within 3 years, quote unquote, safely, as opposed to the methods they have now of either trespass or extremely dangerous.
So the access road, people aren't allowed to walk on it?
At the moment, no, it's only for authorized vehicles and personnel. But it's effectively at a parking lot, which could very well be the main access to the beach. That was in mind. There was an old road there. If you go look at old pictures, you can see it. So anyway, so that's in process. We'll have 6 meetings over the next 8 months. And then Post and the county will go for it.
Congratulations, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Do we have anything else? Okay, then the only other thing we have is council agendas. On December 12th, we have the council reorganization and the swearing in of our new council members. And
Can I make a departing speech in December?
I think you can.
Yeah. Like the announcement section when I'm
Yes,
supposed to.
yeah. Relatively short, but sure.
You and Chris,
Farewell address.
this is the time,
Swan song.
yeah.
The state of Brandon and the state of Chris.
You get a whole peak going, just. Speaking of that, Dave, I think there was a state of county, tonight.
Yeah, it was the state of the county that Dave Pine gave that.
Oh, that's where everybody is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we have potentially 2 meetings in November because Thanksgiving is way early this year. We have no agenda items for either yet.
Well, you didn't ask.
And so I was going to ask, does anybody have agenda items?
Well, I could do a study session if you want on an overview of Connect the Coastside to date, which, this project, nobody's looked at it for 2.5 years, and I forgot, I was reading there and think, wow, look at that, this and that, and the other. So I thought to do that, and also I could add in a status on the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study Action Plan.
Sure.
Does that sound,
Do you have a preferred date? It's
the 14th?
the 14th?
Might as well.
Okay. And, if we don't get anything for the 28th, I don't think anybody will be heartbroken to cancel right after Thanksgiving. And of course, in December, we'll only have the one because the second one will be the day after Christmas.
But there may
So-
be things that come up that we want to do.
In which case, we'll,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
the 3 dates here, November 14th, 28th, December 12th, those 3 dates are potential planning commission meetings as well. They may be canceled, but those are potential. Of course, that's the morning of the meeting we meet, so if there's something on their agenda that we need to comment on, we will likely need a special meeting, like on
So-
Sunday or the Monday. money at the latest Sunday, but the only things that would, that could be, will be Arbor Lane, Valmar Bluff. Now, the planners said he's aiming for December 12th for Valmar Bluff, and the planner for Arbor Lane says she wants to get it done this year, but she didn't give me a date. So maybe they'll both be on December 12th. That would be great. Anyway,
Then we can cover it on the 28th.
it's a short agenda item because there's nothing new on it. We've already commented. We just have to format this, reiterate the main points to the planning commission rather than to the planner. So it's a short meeting. And all we need is a quorum. Everybody doesn't need to come. We've seen 4 people here.
All right, anybody else have agenda items or potential?
And for the December 12th, I was thinking, if you want me to, I would like to do an annual report of the MCC activities, actions, and the status of our projects.
Thank you, yeah, you did mention wanting to do that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, just to sort of wrap up whatever, and here's where we stand, and then going into the year, that's behind us.
Okay, and I would suggest as the new chair that Claire start trying to set the date for the retreat in January. So I would hope that all of us continuing on the council will have our availability in January and make an effort to keep dates open until we've set that date.
Maybe we can finalize that on the 12th also?
We might be able to. It would be great if we could. All right, anything else that anybody can think of that I forgot? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
We adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.